Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin. Yet for a mind like Jung's, a mind steeped in classical philology, global mythology, and the esoteric traditions of the West, this explanation felt incomplete. It accounted for the sickness of the psyche with stunning insight, yet it seemed to possess a limited vocabulary for its health, its creativity, and its profound spiritual yearnings. The Freudian lens could brilliantly illuminate the basement of the human experience, but Jung felt it left the upper floors in darkness. The initial point of theoretical friction, and the one that precipitated the final break, centered on this very concept of libido. Jung embarked on a radical reconceptualization. He proposed that libido was a generalized psychic energy, a fundamental life force akin to Henri Bergson's élan vital. In this expanded view, sexual drive was one powerful manifestation of libido, but it was far from the only one. The same essential energy could fuel intellectual ambition, artistic creation, or a spiritual quest. When a person poured their soul into a mathematical problem, a symphony, or a religious practice, they were channeling this primary psychic energy. This move was philosophically immense. It transformed psychoanalysis from a theory focused primarily on psychopathology into a potential framework for understanding the whole of human culture and aspiration. It allowed for a psychology that could speak of the sacred and the sublime without immediately diagnosing them as sublimated pathologies. This was a direct challenge to the core of Freudian orthodoxy, and it was received as such. It was the intellectual equivalent of heresy. This expansion of libido, however, raised a profound question. If this psychic energy animates our universal myths, our religious symbols, and our shared fairy tales, from where do these universal patterns originate? If a patient in a Zurich clinic with little formal education produced dream imagery that astonishingly mirrored motifs from ancient Gnostic texts or obscure Hindu mythology, how could this be explained by their personal life history alone? The Freudian model, with its focus on individual experience and repressed infantile wishes, appeared insufficient to account for these startling parallels. The problem demanded a new psychic geography, a deeper stratum of the mind. Here, Jung made his most audacious and enduring contribution to psychological thought, the hypothesis of the collective unconscious. He proposed that beneath the thin crust of personal consciousness, and even below the personal unconscious containing an individual's own forgotten memories and repressed experiences, there existed a vast shared psychic inheritance. This was a collective layer, common to all human beings across all cultures and all of history. It is a concept that can be, with some academic license, analogized to a kind of psychic genome, where our biological genes contain the blueprint for our physical form: 2 arms, a heart with 4 chambers, a predisposition to walk upright. The collective unconscious contains the blueprint for our psychic potential. It is the inherited, latent memory of our species' ancestral past, a repository of the accumulated experiences of countless generations. Its contents are the archetypes. These are primordial patterns, innate predispositions to experience and represent the world in certain ways. The archetypes themselves are formless, like psychic instincts, until they are filled out with the specific imagery and content of an individual's life and culture. The universal figure of the wise old man, the great mother, the hero's perilous journey, the catastrophic flood. These are recurring motifs in global mythology, because, in Jung's view, they correspond to archetypal structures within the collective unconscious. The psyche is born with a readiness to construct these images and narratives. This theory provided a stunningly elegant explanation for the independent emergence of nearly identical myths and symbols in civilizations that had no historical contact. It suggested that the human mind was telling itself the same fundamental stories over and over because it was built that way. The implications were staggering. It offered a bridge between the empirical world of clinical psychology and the vast, often dismissed, world of mythology, religion, and the arts. These cultural phenomena were the external projections of the inner archetypal world. For Jung, a cathedral, a mandala, or a folk tale was a piece of psychological data as valuable as a patient's dream. It gave a kind of scientific dignity to the study of the human spirit. The modern academic can see its legacy woven into the fabric of other disciplines. The work of the great comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell, particularly his seminal book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, is a direct intellectual descendant of Jung's thought, tracing the archetypal hero's journey through countless world cultures. Its influence permeates literary criticism, film studies, and art therapy, providing a durable and potent framework for analyzing universal human narratives and symbols. With this single powerful concept, Jung had declared his independence and charted a course into a territory his former mentor would never explore. The foundational layer of his new psychology was in place. Ahead lay the immense task of mapping its complete topography, its conscious orientations, its personal shadows, and its ultimate lifelong drive toward an integrated wholeness. The monumental work of charting this new psychological continent began, as any cartography must, with the known world, the island of consciousness. For Jung, the center of this illuminated realm was the ego. This was the seat of identity, the command post of our waking life, the coherent sense of I that organizes our thoughts, feelings, and memories, and gives us a feeling of continuity from one day to the next. The ego is what we mean when we say myself. Yet in Jung's expanding vision, this familiar territory represented a mere fraction of the psyche's total landmass. It was the lit-up portion of a globe that was mostly shrouded in darkness, a darkness teeming with its own life and its own laws. Immediately beneath the bright surface of consciousness lay the first of these hidden regions, the personal unconscious. This domain was unique to each individual, a private repository for all the experiences, thoughts, and feelings that had been forgotten, repressed, or were simply too weak to reach the threshold of conscious awareness. It contained the half-remembered slights of childhood, the abandoned ambitions of youth, the subliminal perceptions of a moment ago. Crucially, this was where Jung located his concept of the complex. Drawing directly from his empirical work with the word association tests at the Berghelsley Clinic, he had observed how certain stimulus words would provoke delayed reactions, physiological changes, and peculiar responses in patients. He deduced these were emotional tripwires, connected to charged clusters of ideas and feelings in the unconscious. A mother complex or a power complex would behave like a psychic splinter, disrupting the smooth functioning of the ego and asserting its own autonomous agenda. These complexes were the active, often troublesome, inhabitants of the personal psychic underworld. This is the face we present to the world, the compromise between our individual identity and the expectations of society. It is our professional title, our social role, our public self. A well-developed persona is essential for navigating the complexities of communal life. It is a tool for adaptation. The danger arises when an individual mistakes this functional mask for their true self, leading to a hollow and inauthentic existence. Deeper within lies the shadow, perhaps Jung's most famous and consequential archetypal concept. The shadow represents the other side of our personality, the repository for all the qualities we disown and seek to hide from ourselves and others. It contains our primitive instincts, our unacceptable desires, our weaknesses, and our undeveloped potentials. In a culture that values kindness, the shadow will be aggressive. In a person who prides themselves on rationality, the shadow will be emotional and chaotic. Confronting the shadow is a profound moral challenge, a necessary step in acknowledging the totality of one's being. Next are the paired archetypes of the anima and the animus. The anima is the unconscious feminine aspect within a man's psyche, shaped by his primordial experience of woman. The animus is the corresponding unconscious masculine aspect within a woman's psyche. These contrasexual figures function as mediators to the deeper layers of the unconscious. They are responsible for our capacity for relationship, and they heavily influence our choice of romantic partners, as we often project our own inner anima or animus onto an external person. Engagement with this inner figure is critical for creativity, inspiration, and psychological balance. At the very center of this entire system, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious, is the archetype of the self. The self is the archetype of wholeness, the organizing principle of the total personality. It represents the quest for unity, balance, and integration. While the ego is the center of consciousness, the self is the center of the entire psyche. Its symbol, appearing spontaneously in dreams and art across cultures, is the mandala, a circle or squared circle that represents cosmic order and psychic totality. The realization of the self is the ultimate goal of psychological life. Having mapped the psyche's vertical structure from the ego down to the self, Jung turned his attention to its horizontal orientation. He sought to create a systematic classification of the different ways the conscious ego habitually relates to the world. This inquiry culminated in his 1921 masterwork, Psychological Types. The problem he addressed was a fundamental one. Why do intelligent people of goodwill so often fail to understand one another? He saw this in his clinical practice, in academic disputes, and most pointedly in his own divergent intellectual style compared to that of Freud or Alfred Adler. He proposed that these differences arose from innate temperamental biases. His system begins with two fundamental attitudes, or directions of psychic energy. The extrovert's energy flows outward, toward the external world of people, objects, and activities. They are energized by social interaction and oriented by objective data. The introvert's energy flows inward, toward the inner world of thoughts, ideas, and feelings. They are energized by reflection and oriented by their subjective understanding. Jung was careful to state that everyone possesses both attitudes, but one tends to be dominant and more developed. To these two attitudes, he added 4 functions of consciousness, which he divided into 2 pairs. The rationals or judging functions are thinking and feeling. Thinking evaluates information logically and impersonally, seeking to understand its truth or falsehood. Feeling evaluates information based on subjective values, determining whether something is pleasant or unpleasant, acceptable or unacceptable. The irrational or perceiving functions are sensation and intuition. Sensation perceives the world through the 5 senses, focusing on concrete reality and the details of the here and now. Intuition perceives the world through the unconscious, grasping possibilities, hidden meanings, and the bigger picture. Again, while all 4 functions are present in every psyche, one tends to be dominant, supported by an auxiliary function. The combination of a dominant attitude and a dominant function creates a specific psychological type: the introverted thinker, the extroverted feeler, the introverted intuitive, and so on. This framework provided a powerful, nuanced tool for understanding individual differences without pathologizing them. It offered a language for appreciating that another person's way of processing the world could be profoundly different, yet equally valid. The enduring legacy of this system is undeniable. It forms the direct intellectual ancestry of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, an instrument whose use in corporate, educational, and counseling settings is pervasive. While academic psychology often criticizes the MBTI for its psychometric limitations and binary categories, its persistence speaks to the profound resonance of Jung's original insight. He gave the world a compelling model for conceptualizing human diversity, an architecture that continues to shape how millions of people understand themselves and others. With this structural map complete, the stage was set to explore the dynamic life process that unfolds within it, the psyche's inherent drive toward integration and completion. The static architecture of the psyche, with its archetypes and typological orientations, provided a necessary foundation. The profound question that followed was one of movement. How does this intricate system evolve through a lifetime? Having mapped the territory, Jung turned his attention to the journey itself. He sought a psychology that could account for the human impulse toward growth, meaning and self-realization, a framework that could guide an individual along the path to becoming fully themselves. This led him to formulate what is arguably the central, unifying concept of his entire psychological system: the process of individuation. Individuation is the psyche's inherent, teleological drive toward wholeness. It is a lifelong process of differentiation and integration, a difficult and often perilous voyage into the depths of one's own being. The aim is the realization of the self, an archetype representing the totality of the personality, which emerges as the new center of psychic life, displacing the ego from its position of solitary command. For Jung, this was the natural trajectory of human development, a psychic parallel to the biological imperative to grow from an acorn into an oak tree. The process begins with a crucial and often unsettling encounter: the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is the archetype of everything an individual represses, everything they refuse to acknowledge about themselves. It contains the inferior, unwanted, and undeveloped parts of the personality. In personal life, it manifests as those qualities we despise in others, failing to see them as our own disowned traits. The first step in the individuation journey requires immense moral courage, the withdrawal of these projections, and the painful acceptance of one's own darkness. This is a humbling and essential task, for without assimilating the shadow, one remains incomplete, a fragmented being at war with oneself. Following the integration of the shadow, the journey leads to a yet more subtle and complex layer of the unconscious, represented by the syzygy of the anima and animus. The anima is the inner feminine figure within a man's psyche. The animus is the inner masculine figure within a woman's. These are contrasexual archetypes, bridges to the collective unconscious, carriers of profound creative and destructive potential. They are shaped by personal experiences with the opposite sex, beginning with the parents, but their core is archetypal. The anima often appears in a man's dreams or fantasies as a figure of enthralling allure or mysterious wisdom, while the animus in a woman might manifest as a figure of authority, spiritual conviction, or decisive action. Integrating this archetype involves moving beyond initial, often idealized or demonized projections onto real people. It requires developing a conscious relationship with this inner figure, transforming it from an autonomous, disruptive force into a source of creativity, insight, and connection to the soul. This dialogue with the anima or animus is a pivotal stage of individuation, enriching the personality with the qualities of its psychic opposite and opening the gateway to the deeper layers of the self. To facilitate this profound inner work, Jung needed practical methods, clinical tools that could open a channel of communication between the conscious ego and the vast articulate world of the unconscious. His primary instrument was a re-envisioning of dream analysis. While Sigmund Freud had famously interpreted dreams as the disguised fulfillment of repressed wishes, primarily rooted in past conflicts, Jung's approach was prospective and compensatory. He saw the dream as a natural, unvarnished expression of the psyche's current state. He believed dreams served to compensate for the imbalances of the conscious attitude, offering a corrective viewpoint. If a person's conscious life was excessively rational, their dreams might be filled with potent, archaic symbolism. If their life lacked spiritual meaning, their dreams might present powerful religious imagery. The dream for Jung was a communiqué from the self, offering guidance, warnings, and a symbolic map for the path ahead. His hermeneutic method involved a process of amplification, where he would explore the dream's symbols by connecting them to parallels in mythology, folklore, and religion, seeking to understand the image's archetypal significance for the dreamer's specific life situation. This approach yielded remarkable insights, yet Jung felt a more direct method of engagement was possible. This led to the development of his most original and powerful therapeutic technique, active imagination. This method is a form of waking, conscious dialogue with the figures of the unconscious. The process begins with the individual focusing their attention on a spontaneous mood, image, or fantasy. Instead of dismissing it, they allow it to take on a life of its own, to personify itself as a figure or a scene. The crucial step is the conscious participation of the ego. The individual enters into a dialogue with the figure, asking it questions, challenging its assertions, and treating it as an autonomous psychic reality. This is an ethical confrontation. The goal is to understand the figure's purpose and to integrate its message into conscious life. It is a disciplined, often dramatic, and profoundly transformative practice. Through active imagination, an individual could directly engage their shadow, their anima or animus, or other archetypal figures, building a stable bridge between the conscious and unconscious realms. This technique provided a way to work with the raw material of the psyche in real time, fostering a synthesis of opposites and advancing the process of individuation with a unique immediacy and power. It was Jung's definitive answer to the problem of how a modern individual could forge a living, breathing relationship with the ancient, mythopoetic depths of their own soul. The disciplined engagement with the psyche through active imagination could yield profound internal transformations. Occasionally, however, the symbolic dramas playing out within the mind seemed to resonate with events in the material world, creating coincidences so potent with meaning they strained the explanatory power of chance. These occurrences pushed Jung toward one of his most ambitious and speculative intellectual frontiers, the relationship between the inner world of the psyche and the outer world of physical reality. He sought a principle that could account for these meaningful conjunctions, one that operated alongside the familiar chain of cause and effect. This led to his formulation of synchronicity, a concept developed through a remarkable and lengthy collaboration with the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Pauli, one of the architects of quantum mechanics, was himself grappling with a universe where the classical laws of causality appeared to break down at the subatomic level. His own psychological distress had led him to Jung, and their subsequent correspondence represents a unique dialogue between the vanguard of physics and the depths of psychology. Together they explored the possibility of an acausal connecting principle, a lawfulness that links events through their shared meaning. A synchronistic event in Jung's framework involves the confluence of an inner psychic state, a dream, a vision, a powerful emotion, with an external event that mirrors the inner state in a symbolically significant way. His famous example involved a patient who, at a critical impasse in her therapy, recounted a dream of a golden scarab. As she spoke, a beetle, a Cetonia aurata, which is a close European analogue to a scarab, began tapping at the consulting room window. Jung caught the beetle and presented it to her, an act that shattered her overly rationalistic worldview and catalyzed a therapeutic breakthrough. For Jung, the meaning connecting the dream and the beetle was the organizing force, a moment where the archetypal pattern of rebirth, symbolized by the scarab, manifested simultaneously in both the psychic and physical realms. Synchronicity proposed a cosmos where psyche and matter were two aspects of a single, underlying reality, occasionally revealing their unified nature through these startling, meaningful alignments. This search for unifying principles, for a hidden order connecting disparate parts of experience, also defined the final great intellectual passion of Jung's life, his immersion in the obscure world of alchemy. Having mapped the psyche's structure and the dynamics of its transformation, he sought a historical parallel, a symbolic tradition that had, perhaps unconsciously, chronicled the very same process. He found it buried within the cryptic, allegorical treatises of medieval and Renaissance alchemists. For over 30 years he painstakingly collected and interpreted these texts, coming to a radical conclusion. The alchemical opus magnum, the great work of turning base metals into gold, was a grand, centuries-long projection of the process of individuation. He saw the alchemist's place as peace, divi me distinguish seis, the prima materia, the chaotic, undifferentiated base substance the alchemists began with, represented the raw, unconscious state of the personality. The complex stages of the work corresponded to the phases of psychological transformation. The nigredo, or blackening, was the painful but necessary confrontation with the shadow, the descent into psychic darkness and depression. This was followed by the albedo, the whitening, a stage of purification and illumination achieved by washing the psychic contents, often through the integration of the anima or animus. The process culminated in the rubedo, the reddening, which symbolized the passionate union of opposites, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, spirit and body, to create the legendary lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone. For Jung, this stone was the perfect symbol for the self, an indestructible whole and integrated personality, the ultimate goal of the individuation journey. Through his alchemical studies, Jung gave his psychological system a deep historical resonance, arguing that the modern quest for self-realization was a conscious continuation of an ancient intuitive art practiced under the guise of primitive chemistry. In the final analysis, the legacy of Carl Jung is one of profound and generative paradox. He was a clinical empiricist who drew his evidence from the subjective depths of dreams, myths, and religious visions. His concepts, from the archetypes to synchronicity, often elude the grasp of conventional falsifiable scientific methodology. His immense body of work stands as a monumental cartography of the inner world, a detailed mapping of a territory that science has frequently preferred to ignore. He was a phenomenologist of the soul, granting intellectual legitimacy to the lived reality of human experience in all its irrational, symbolic, and spiritual richness. He forged a vocabulary for the psyche that continues to resonate far beyond the therapeutic consulting room, influencing literature, film, art history, and religious studies. By re-engaging with the great symbolic systems of the past, with Gnosticism, with mythology, with alchemy, he constructed a powerful counter-narrative to the disenchantment of the modern world. He offered a framework wherein the individual's search for meaning was the central drama of life, a psychological imperative as fundamental as any biological drive. His lasting contribution
was the creation of a sophisticated, deeply humanistic psychology that validates our connection to the vast, ancient inheritance of the collective unconscious. He provided a compass for navigating the often turbulent waters of inner life, ensuring his work remains a vital resource for anyone attempting to understand the full measure and mystery of human consciousness.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.